So with that, I think we can start progressing on to Javier. Javier, I'll go ahead and start doing your intro as we have you pull up your screen. So Javier is a data and AI specialist at Microsoft. He works with providers supporting their digital transformation by advising them on cloud-based data strategies for data modernization, analytics, and artificial intelligence, with the goal of helping them improve operational and clinical capabilities. Over the past 20 years, he's held various roles in the data and analytics field, including data architect, consultant, and practice director. And with that, Javier, we can see your screen. Go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, and welcome everyone to this session today about Azure Open AI and the work that we're doing with healthcare organizations in this space. So, did wanted to talk about, broadly speaking, what is our partnership with Azure Open AI? What are the kind of use cases that we're driving? Going a little bit into how this technology works. And then we'll move on to another speaker, Dantry, who will drive a little bit more around demos of this technology. So I'm going to be flipping here my screen. Sorry, I have 4 monitors today, so I'm looking a little bit everywhere. But in terms of Azure Open AI and specifically GPT models, as many of you know, they're part of this wave of generative AI. Which is a little bit different from what we've seen AI models doing in the past. So for years, we've been applying AI technologies, mostly in a narrow scope of tasks. So we've seen that a lot in automation of workflows and, addressing specific, as I mentioned, narrow use cases. But with the advent of generative AI and the language understanding or reasoning abilities of these large language models like GPT, the applications of this technology are a little bit broader, right? So we see the ability to handle out of the box many kind of topics, the ability to reason with you on a chat interaction, and then be able to ground the models in the context of your enterprise data. I'll talk about that in a little bit more, but that opens the path to a lot of new use cases. So we've been supporting a lot of our customers that are exploring new scenarios, and we'll talk a little bit of what those scenarios are. But yeah, it is definitely a new wave that opens the path to more use cases. Tim mentioned previously our partnership with OpenAI is pretty close, and specifically when it comes to the Microsoft Cloud, we're talking about the deployment of 3 model families. GPT, which in itself, again, is a model family that has a few different models within it, Codex and DALL-E. And specifically, what that means is the GPT functionality, as I mentioned, out of the box has language understanding and also reasoning abilities. There's been some conversation about sparks of artificial general intelligence, the ability to really infer relationships in textual objects, for example. And so if you query a GPT model through prompts, you'll be able to get out of the box already responses. No need to train the model, it's been already trained. Codex is the ability to provide prompts to the model and then receive back code, which can be helpful for application development, whether you're coding in SQL, Python, or in the case of Power BI, DAX formulas. It's pretty helpful. And then DALL-E, as shown here, is image generation. In Azure, as I mentioned, GPT-3 is really a family of models, and we have various options for customers that are deploying GPT or ChatGPT in the Azure cloud. You're able to pick which model you want to work with. So it gives you the ability to make choices and, again, to customize the chat experience. So you can see Ada is a great model that is very fast, and it provides simple classification abilities. Whereas DaVinci, might take a little bit more to respond, but it's really great at generating content and creative content, and also summarizing with a specific style. Again, this gives you choices as a customer on which model you want to use. Codex also, we have a similar scenario there. And GPT-4, which is now being generally available, so it's out of preview in the Azure cloud, is really a multi-model model that it increases the reliability and is able to generate much more nuanced responses. GPT-4, if you're interested, there's an application process for access, and the reason why we have an application process because we're following responsible AI principles, ensure that organizations and use cases are aligned to those principles. But it is available today. GPT-4 specifically has shown a pretty good performance on benchmark. So often it outperforms competitors or even previous generation GPT models. For example, the GPT-4 scored 1,410 out of 1,600 in the SAT reading and math exam, which puts it at 90% percentile of human testers. It also scored 298 out of 400 in the uniform bar exam, which is high enough to be licensed as a lawyer in any U.S. state. And it also scored 75% on the medical knowledge self-assessment program. So as you can see, there's an increasing ability to not just provide language understanding in a general sense, but also out of the box knowledge of many subject areas. Also, one thing to note, what Tim mentioned, is that Azure Open AI and OpenAI as a separate organization both rely on Azure AI infrastructure. This is what we often call the Microsoft's AI supercomputer, which really is able to handle over 100 million users a day. We've seen this acceleration of AI capability that's been driven by the rise of GPU and cloud scale infrastructure. We've also built specialized hardware and software stack to support training and inferencing of large language models, going to hundreds of billions of parameters. For example, the original GPT-3 model had 175 billion parameters, but the newer Microsoft Megatron Turing natural language model has 530 billion parameters. So clearly efficient infrastructure to run these kind of workloads at this scale is very critical. Now, one thing I do want to mention, and there I would put in a video there, link to a full review of our Azure AI infrastructure supporting these kind of models, and we'll share the slides. But that one thing that I do want to mention is this state-of-the-art hardware runs in a clustered GPU infrastructure with a high bandwidth network, and it also carries Azure specific optimizations like the ONNX runtime for model portability, and also out of the work from Microsoft Research, the DeepSeed framework, which allows to componentize models to really enable distributed machine learning training at scale. So those are some of the software optimizations in addition to the GPU infrastructure that has been enabled for these kind of models. So we talked about the Azure Open AI service and what it brings to the Azure cloud. As I mentioned, in the case of GPT models, we have GPT 3.5, we have GPT-4 now generally available, and also the ChatGPT interface. So often we hear from, in my case, I work with providers, we hear, provider leadership some of the organizations that I work with mention that often their clinical teams are starting to experiment with GPT functionality. So you might here some team members going into ChatGPT, which is publicly available, and start to experiment what's possible there. Often what we say from our perspective in Microsoft, you can deploy the same ChatGPT experience within your Azure environment. So you can secure the access and you can provide the proper compliance. For example, the service is HIPAA compliant, so that you're really providing enterprise-ready alternative to go into the public ChatGPT. That has resonated with many providers that I work with, where, again, they want to be able to provide this experience, but in a secure environment. We as Microsoft, we also think it's important to emphasize that we follow responsible AI principles. These AI principles, as you can see on the screen, there's a number of them, is being documented publicly from Microsoft, and this is what we seek to achieve when we develop AI services. I won't touch on all of them, but did wanted to mention, for example, transparency is really mapped to interpretability of the model. So we have features or we have capabilities within our AI products, like, for example, Azure Machine Learning, to really assist with the ability to provide an understanding of how the model is behaving and how it came out with the output that it did. So that's a very key component. Accountability is also something that is important, because from a Microsoft perspective, we want to ensure that AI systems are not the final authority on any decision that affect people's lives. It is really the people who design and deploy AI systems, the ones that should be accountable or must be accountable for how the systems operate. So in the context of healthcare, we really broadly embrace the idea of co-pilot experiences, where even if we're working with clinical or even operational teams, our intent is not to replace those teams at all, but to provide a way to augment their work, to assist their work, such that the accountability still resides on human beings. So I'm trying to track time here, Matt, and I meant to start my clock to track time, but if I'm getting close to my allotted time, please let me know.
Sounds good.
Okay. So one thing that is unique of this Azure Open AI and GPT and ChatGPT models in the Microsoft Cloud is how we embrace, again, this enterprise readiness for deployment at any organization. So as it's stated here, your data is your data. So it is encrypted in your Azure subscription. It's not visible by anybody else. And any fine-tuning of the model or any grounding of the model is really done within the boundaries of your Azure enrollment. Fine-tuning the model is not going to retrain the foundational model, which doing so will make your data accessible to others. We don't do that. So if you deploy these models to your Azure environment, to your Azure enrollment and subscriptions, and then fine-tune and run the model, that stays within those boundaries of your organization. And then this service is really intended for a protected and secure access. So it is, you can enable private VNets, you can enable role-based access control, RBAC. As you can see, we have compliance to industry standards like HIPAA, for example. Really attempting, or our goal is to make it useful to you in a way that is ready for business use cases. So Microsoft has been building this Azure Open AI LLM functionality within our own products, right? So we have the concept of copilots across many products that we're bundling in. So for example, for analytics, we're bundling Copilot Experience, LLM, the ability to search and query and analyze your data, all within Power BI. In search, we have Bing Chat as well, GitHub Copilot, assist app developers with code generation, really optimizing the time. But from an enterprise customer perspective, really the opportunity is to develop your own custom solution, right? Whether you're driving towards a call center chat experience, or want to personalize, in the case of healthcare providers, patient interactions, or maybe you want to use it to process documents and summarize textual documentation. So we're providing Azure Open AI really as a building block for your own solutions that might be applicable to your enterprise. And this is what we see a lot of customers starting to adopt. I know this is not just specific to healthcare, but just want to show a sample of customers that are starting to embrace this technology. Within healthcare and healthcare customers that I work with, many are already in the process of doing POCs, pilots of integration of LLM functionality into their workflows. And I know a few that are already in production. I think often we hear, what are the top capabilities and use cases for this technology? So we've talked about content generation, and that could, in the case of healthcare, really drive personalized experience. For example, assisting learning process, let's say a patient education on how to care for their illness at home, or how to transition to home prior to discharge. So that personalized interaction could be done through a ChatGPT or a GPT type of experience. Summarization is a big use case where we've seen call center analytics or call center process optimization through assistant agents, again, through the concept of Copilot, provide recommendations and suggestions for appointments and follow-ups to the call center agent based on summarization of the call, for example. We've also seen summarization of patient service to understand opportunities for care quality improvement. And then lastly, an opportunity could be shift handover assistance by summarizing shift information to facilitate nurse shift handover, for example. As you can see, code generation is also an option here. I won't talk much about that because I think we're driving to some business use cases here. But then at the end, towards the right, you see semantic search. That is also a very important use case. We've seen a lot of interest on the chat with your own data type of scenario, where you want to provide a very robust language interactive chat experience, but grounded on your own data. So that is something that we're enabling through the ability to fine-tune the models, or to provide an add-on to the models using search. So to explain this concept briefly, I think I'm getting closer to time here, but to explain this concept, GPT out of the box provides general purpose responses to your prompts, right? When we provide the concept of examples you can, for example, provide examples through prompting. This is what we refer to as few-shot learning. And the model understands how to respond to your prompts based on your examples. But then, what if we're able to combine the GPT capabilities with search, right? So on the left, you can see the generative AI LLM capabilities that we've been talking about. On the right, if we are able to search your own data, for which we have, for example, a service in the Microsoft Cloud, which we called Azure Cognitive Search. Azure Cognitive Search allows you to point the search, the crawling of your own internal data, create a searchable index that they can be leveraged by GPT models to, in effect, provide an experience where you're interacting with your own enterprise data. I think we're almost at time here, but I wanted to provide.
I was going to So Javier, we've got about 7 or so minutes left here.
7 minutes.
That
Okay.
include questions for your session, but your
Right.
timing on this. There's some good conversation in the chat regarding the use of Azure Open AI models compared to ChatGPT, the service in that, and some questions around comparatively kind of what you're getting from those. Would you be able to comment a little bit about the base models used in each of those in the context of the kind of the personalized use cases and examples that you're giving here? I think it would help with some of the chat component.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me respond to that. Just briefly touch on this high-level overview just before I respond to that. This is the concept of a high-level architecture where you're providing forms on the left through, maybe they're stored in Azure storage, let's say PDF, text files, for example, patient surveys, as I mentioned. We use Form Recognizer to extract. This is an AI service in the Azure cloud to extract information from those forms and make it digitally available. Then we can build a search index through cognitive search and then apply the LLM capabilities for interaction with that data. And then, as towards the right, you can see the question and answer coming from users. Again, a high level, we've actually provided some functionality recently to facilitate this type of deployment and even a quick start tutorial. Going back to your question, Matt, the foundational models are the same, right? So ChatGPT offers, for example, with ChatGPT Plus, you have GPT-4 experience in the publicly available ChatGPT. We also, in the Azure cloud, you have access to the GPT-4 model. It is the same model. It's being trained, it is the same model. It becomes accessible to you to customize your experience or to embed as part of your workflow. GPT-4 is the more advanced model, but we also give you access to predecessors like GPT-3 and 3.5.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying on that.
Yeah. One last slide. I know coming out of time here, time flies when you're having fun, but did wanted to show that from a Microsoft perspective, we think of Azure Open AI as really the Azure Open AI models as a component that is made available, that is part of a broader, bigger picture, right? So in Azure AI services, we bundle AI with applications. We also bundle AI with our business applications suite. So for example, Power BI would have Copilot functionality. Then we have scenario-based AI models. So whether you're building a bot or maybe you want to perform sentiment analysis, that is all part of our cognitive search. And then you have customizable AI models, for vision, speech, language. And then if you're a data scientist, want to build your own, data science code from scratch, we have the Azure Machine Learning Platform. So again, just wanted to place it as part of the bigger picture, which I think is important. Often we see custom solutions being built with a number of these components, not just the Azure OpenAI models. So I'll stop there. Any questions that I can answer in a couple of minutes, Matt?
Yeah, so there's one that's come up, and I think it was addressed some in chat, but I think you could help perhaps comment on it and elaborate a bit more. And it's around healthcare regulations, things like HIPAA and so forth, and the use of these models, whether it's around choice of use cases or how the data is handled. How are we thinking about that, or how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if we'll be able to cover it fully in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, again, you have like 2-3 minutes, so Cliff Notes version, if you could, please.
Yeah, but there's two sides. One is our goal to provide an industry compliant experience with HIPAA, for example. We have a full compliance documentation. We'll post it probably in the chat that showcase how Azure OpenAI, as well as a number of other Azure services, comply to industry standards. So that is one part of the question. The other part is the security. We have paid a lot of attention to the deployment of security guardrails for Azure OpenAI. So everything from securing or ensuring there's privacy on your interactions. So, for example, Microsoft does not store long-term prompt and response data on your own custom interactions. And also the availability to using private links, for example, to maintain all that interaction within your Azure enrollment and not make it out to the internet. So there's a whole security conversation that we can have, and feel free to reach out to us on that aspect.
Excellent. Appreciate you putting a pin in that, Javier, and of course, lots of opportunity to go into much further detail around any customer's specific use cases.
Yeah.
So with that,